Good morning. Thank you guys so much for being here, and thank you, Mary, for having me back again. I am excited to be back and be presenting again to the people that help to protect and serve and advocate for our youth. So we're gonna go over digital safety. I have a point in time where we can stop for a break, and then feel free to stop and ask questions as we go throughout the presentation. So just a little bit about me. I am formerly a teacher in the elementary schools. I went back and got my MSW to be a social worker and am certified to be in the school. So I'm currently a junior high social worker out in the northwest suburbs. And in between teaching and what I'm currently doing in the schools, I did some things outside of the schools, such as working at the Attorney General's office as the internet safety specialist within the High Tech Crimes Bureau, which was a lot of fun, and I actually really enjoyed doing the presentations. So my goals for you today is to educate on the dangers as well as the benefits of online presence for really all of us, but specifically focusing on youth, adolescents, and young adults, as well as providing those strategies to make sure that when we're online, that we are protecting ourselves as well as helping to protect the people that we serve. So just a quick question of who is in the audience. How many of you are parents yourselves? How many of you work in the schools as well? How many of you are juvenile probation? How many of you are at the community college, JCC? And what are some of the roles that you guys hold in the different areas that, whether you're at the schools, community college, what are some of the roles, what are some of the things that you do in your work? Administration? Clinician?
Youth advisor.
Advisor?
For high school dropout.
Okay. Anybody else want to share?
I run a summer camp.
Okay, awesome.
And youth programming for a while.
Okay, great, thank you. So what we're going to do today is go over the social media that the kids are on, that probably a lot of us are on, the gaming systems. Throughout, we'll talk about that digital footprint. You'll see that little footprint kind of joining us along the presentation. Then cyberbullying, predators, sexting, all that kind of combines within that realm. And then throughout, we'll talk about some of that prevention as well as responding, but we'll kind of focus on that at the end. Like I said, please ask questions throughout. You'll notice that what you have in front of you, I tried to give you as much information as possible, so it may seem overwhelming. I'm not gonna read through all of that, and I've taken some of it out so as to not overwhelm us as we're going through, but I wanted to give you as much information in the presentation that you have in your hands as possible. So just a quote that I thought would serve us as we talk. We know that online safety, a lot of times we get hyper-focused on the dangers. So I like this quote in just saying that if we acknowledge the risks and we do what we can to mitigate the harm that could happen to us and others, then we can therefore reap the rewards and have the benefit of the technology that we're using. So just to kind of remind ourselves where adolescents and young adults are at, we know that they need our encouragement, right? They are given this. At the school I'm at, all of our students have Chromebooks. When they go on to high school, they're all gonna have iPads, and that Chromebook is going from the junior high and it's working its way down through the elementary school, where that's gonna be part of not only now their home and personal lives, but part of their academic lives. And so we just have to remind ourselves that it is our job to encourage them and help them and advocate for them to be upstanders, to anticipate this is a great tool, but I've got to anticipate when I now have access to the world, I have to anticipate what those consequences are. Maintaining self-confidence, that's hard for probably some of us adults when we see all that we have access to online. Gratification, if you are working with youth and young adults, you know that they need that immediately, right? It's very hard for them to focus when they're not constantly being rewarded and gratified. And then resist that impulsivity that is innate in youth. So what's trending? Just to kind of remind us, what is social media defined? It is communication. It's helping us to share and to consume information. How many of you have ever used Urban Dictionary? You got to prepare yourself because sometimes it's not so politically correct, so I apologize if anybody's offended by the definitions that are coming now. But I like them just because they're real, and then they kind of make us laugh a little bit. So it just is reminding us that adolescents and young adults, and sometimes grown adults, use social media to complain, because they think it makes life interesting, but also to kind of, they want to show off, right? We don't see people's boring lives. We see the exciting stuff that they want us to think that they're doing, and that's what kind of comes into play when we talk about that self-confidence. If we always see people at the parties or hanging out doing the cool things, and we're sitting at home, that can impact us, right? We weren't invited, look at all the fun things. They have the perfect life, they're the perfect parents, they have the perfect boyfriend and girlfriend, and so we have to remind ourselves that this is just part of people's lives. So going into the top apps, what are your guesses as to what they are? Instagram?
Twitter.
What else? YouTube? So you guys this is from the App Store, so I know sometimes Google Play is slightly different. So these are the top apps right now. YouTube, Instagram, as you guys mentioned, Facebook Messenger, Snapchat, Facebook, Netflix, Spotify, Bitmoji. And then here are just some information. Pew Research, if you guys haven't been there, they're a really great resource. What do you notice in common about the majority of these apps? Yeah, a lot of that imagery, right? Videos, photos, access to a lot of things. A lot of them have multiple different features within the app itself. So we just look on here, we've got Facebook Messenger, we know Instagram is linked to Facebook. We think about Netflix, the videos, things like that. So a lot of these, and that's the trend. If you think about at the beginning when Facebook and even MySpace were first out, it was very text heavy, right? It wasn't as much of the pictures, the videos, and that's really gone away. And the quicker the image, the less typing. Twitter, they've extended their character count limit, but initially, it started where it was very short and quick. So just noticing those trends in what people are typically using. So then we have those messaging apps. Why don't they just text? What's the benefit to a messaging app? Privacy. Right, so why privacy? Why privacy on the messaging app versus text?
A lot of the conversation can disappear.
You got the apps that have the disappearing. What else? It's not necessarily linked to your phone number, right? You get to create that username, so there is that little bit of anonymity there. If you're a child, your parents don't necessarily have to see this. As a parent, you can get your kids text, right? But if they're doing something on a messaging app, that's typically more private to them. It's unlimited, so they don't have to be linked to something specific. If they have Wi-Fi, then they can be using those apps essentially for free. And then all of those features that come along with the messaging apps, whether it's text, video chat, group chats, and a lot of them now are starting to have the voice call as well. So you can call all over the place without having any limitation on that. So here are just a few of them and some of the different pieces that come in there. If you've heard of Kik, that's one that years ago really spiked in like predators and things like that because of that anonymity, as well as it was really difficult for people to be tracked in that app. Questions, thoughts? How many of you use a messaging app in addition or in place of texting? What are some of the ones, if you don't mind sharing, what are some of the ones you guys use? Facebook Messenger? WhatsApp? And why, if you don't mind sharing, why do you use those?
Group messaging.
Yeah, typically that is, I would say, at least in my experience. How about you?
I use Facebook Messenger more for people that I don't want to have my phone number.
Good point. So if you're not necessarily friends, right, you can have those conversations there as well. Thank you for sharing. So here are just some others to know. We've got Twitter, Tumblr, Pinterest. So now we're kind of extending out from just the social sharing piece. Musically, actually, just as I was looking up Musically, like that week, so in the last 2 to 4 weeks, TikTok took over Musically, and now it's TikTok. Are you guys familiar with Musically? The short little video music, lip syncing, sharing. Then we have the Google+. As I was saying, a lot of students are now using Chrome. So in Google+ or Chrome, what are all the features you're aware of? So once you have, like even a Gmail, what do you suddenly have access to? Google Hangouts, which can be the texting as well as video chatting. What else? I'm using Slides right now, which is part of the Drive. So you have Google Docs, Slides, their Sheets, which is their version of Excel. Then you have the email. So you have all of a sudden access to a whole bunch of different apps within Google Plus that oftentimes for parents they're not aware of, and even oftentimes for the users. You kind of learn as you go because there's this whole other world within Google Plus. We now have Uber, we have the online shopping, which is becoming huge. We also have gaming. A lot of times we learn that the benefits outweigh the risks, but we hear constantly about the ride sharing, right, where people get in the wrong car and something happens. Or I was just at school yesterday and heard about some stories of kids on their parents' apps and they're buying $80, one of our students spent $80 worth of their parents' money on like an in-app purchases. So just recognizing the access that we have in these little devices, whether we're giving them to little kids or sharing accounts, and recognizing, again, looking at what the risks are, mitigating that, and then using them for the reward. Then we also have online dating, which has increased in popularity. We have Match, we have Tinder, Hinge, Bumble. Have you guys heard of these? What are some of the things you know about the different ways that these work? I went from just like make a profile, find somebody that you like, to there's all these new ways of online dating, right? So Tinder is the swiping. Bumble is similar to that. Bumble actually has multiple different areas. So the dating side is the women making the first move, but they also have like Bumble BFF, Bumble Biz, so they're trying to have access to other areas where not only can you use it for dating, but you can use it to find friends, which there are more apps that are trying to link people who maybe are moving or are new to an area to friends. And then they also have that biz for that, quote unquote business section. And Hinge uses links that you have. So maybe you have a common friend on Facebook and they're using that link to say maybe you guys would be interested in each other because you have this like common friend or something to that effect. Most of them are 17 plus. Tinder actually started out at 13 plus, and then we're kind of forced to raise their age to 17 plus. Typically social media is what? How old are you supposed to be? 13. How easy is it to sign up when you're 8? Yeah, all you have to do is put in a birthday that makes you 13. So again, looking at the online dating, you can just see the trend from the age groups as well as the year. So the dark blue is 2013. You can see for that 18 to 24 population, because that's technically how old you're supposed to be online dating. That's the only ages that they measured. So you can see that it's increased, which is not surprising as we use technology more and more apps are available. So just sharing kind of amongst yourselves, what are some positive ways that how many of you have some form of social media? How many of you email? How many of you text? So thinking about the different apps that you guys use, what are some positive ways that you use them? And what are some strategies that you've used to make sure that you yourself remain safe? I know it's early. Okay, can you share a little bit about, okay, keep in contact with them. Awesome. Do you have separate accounts for those? Awesome. How many of you use social media to keep in contact with the people you work with? How many of you use social media to search the people you work with? To see what they're up to, right? What else? I do like participation from the audience, so I will be asking a lot of questions.
I use it for like Facebook for, I have like a small business.
Okay.
So for promoting that. And then as far as strategies to migrate the risk, just like changing your privacy settings.
Mm-hmm.
So people can't search you, or I've blocked certain people.
Yeah.
That type of thing. So.
Awesome. So privacy settings, first and foremost. A lot of apps are set to public by default. I know some of them are starting to change that. But just being aware, I know myself, I get Facebook notifications all the time about like, hey, make sure your privacy settings are the way you want them. It asks you now how you want to share your post, right? Do you want it on your story? Do you want it just for your friends to see? So they're starting to ask more questions, but it's really still gonna always be on us to make sure that we're using the settings. I like how you talked about using the block, so just knowing the features that are out there for you should you not want people to have contact with you. And then making about searching. So what are ways that we can try to be less searchable? At least on like our personal, because you're talking about your business, you want to be searchable, right? So knowing the differences when you're using to be in contact with your clients, you want them to know it's you, obviously, right? So when it's personal then, because that can be a fine line. I know working in the schools, talking about what we're able to post if I want to share something that I did, that's very different than, hey, can you share this on our school page? So what are some ways that we can, as personal, or our youth or young adults, how can we help them say, there's some times you don't want to be searchable. You just want the people who know you to know you. Any of you have strategies for that? Yeah.
There's a part of me that says that privacy has left the building a long time ago.
Sure.
So anything that you post on any aspect of social media, private or not, it will be public at one point or another. So I think the whole thing share starts with you. Whatever you don't want public doesn't go on social media.
Love it. That's great. And I think you make a good point of like, we almost have to have a new definition of privacy, right? So when we're talking about privacy, we're really talking about like, what do I want out there? What do I want to try to have control over? But essentially, we have to assume we don't ever have control over it once it's out there. So just some strategies that I personally use. I don't use my last name in anything unless it's professional. My last name doesn't go anywhere. Typically, my profile picture isn't even of me. I've started to get a little bit braver because I think in some ways I'm like over the top in the way that I do that. But I don't put where I live. I don't put what I do on my personal stuff. And that way, there's people that have told me I can't even find you. And it's through like mutual people that they're able to find me. And I'm perfectly fine with that. Some people like to share, right? They want to share things about their family. Maybe they don't live near their family. So they want to share. And that's where I think a lot of what you're saying comes into play is we're starting this digital footprint for our younger youth. And even think about the adolescents now. How long have they probably actually been on social media? Maybe since they were 5 to 10 years old, right? Because their family was posting about them. So that's something as we work with adolescents and young adults to help them keep in mind, they have a digital footprint that goes long before they started it. And so they need to be aware of what that looks like. Anything else you guys want to share? How many of you have ever deleted a profile? How many of you still might have a MySpace out there somewhere? I think I might actually. How many of you have encouraged somebody you work with to delete an account? I think sometimes, again, I'm going to go back to your point, we can't assume it's gone, but it's at least good to try. So if they're applying for jobs and they have an account from maybe when they were 13, they may want to start over. They might want to delete that account and then start fresh with a brand new account. Again, doesn't mean that's all gone, but that means at least hopefully there's some less ways for them to be, that past stuff to come back up. So just kind of reading through this really quick. Why do we keep going back? So we spend 3 times more on apps that don't make us feel good, and then they list those there. But we still spend most time there, so why? Say that again?
It's an addiction.
It is. Yeah, I'm going to show you guys a video in a little bit that actually talks about that. I think there's a fine line of when we can say we're actually addicted to it, and there is a new clinical diagnosis on that. But it's addicting because, and I think these are the ones that stick out to me. I'm more likely to scroll on Facebook or Instagram a lot longer because it never stops. Netflix, it annoys me when they ask me, are you still watching? Yes, keep going. You know, I don't want to have to stop what I'm doing to go back and do that. So there are no stopping cues. So if we find that addicting, think about the brain of adolescents and young adults and how they must feel about it. If you think about adolescents and young adults, if they were to sit and have to read or sit and have to listen like we're doing or have to do something on paper, how long would their attention span be? Versus, hey, you want to play, you know, GTA, Fortnite, whatever they're into. I was talking to a kid yesterday, and I know they're a little bit younger than the people that you work with, but they were saying, oh, 10 hours, easy. I could play Fortnite. It's like, you're sitting here with me for 20 minutes and like, come on, talk to me, you know, have this conversation. So again, just thinking about what they're used to, and we often don't interrupt them, parents often don't interrupt them, because it is keeping them quiet and busy, right? So we often think, oh, they're doing something. But thinking about what they're doing. To keep a kid on the tab you want them on. You know, they might be doing something on an email and then get distracted and go to something else because it's accessible to them, right? So there's that benefit of that accessibility, but have we taught them how to maintain focus on one thing? And again, the people that we're working with, those adolescents and young adults, this is what they're used to, right? They've grown up with this. And oftentimes they did not have education on how to use them appropriately. Here's a really great device, have at it. And so now how many years later have they ever been taught how to use it in a way that's not only safe, but that they're using it appropriately? So what are some issues that we might face? Those personal attacks, pressure to just like something, follow something, agree with something, constant access. How many of you sleep with your device with you? Most people, right, sleep with their mobile devices with them. And then the physical consequences, and what I mean by that is the lack of activity. So if somebody's playing a video game for 10 hours, they're obviously not moving much, right? And then eating, things like that. Lack of sleep, the depression that goes along with a lot of the things that they're having access to. So what are the advantages? What are the advantages that you see in the work that you do of technology? And it could be any that are up here, and it could be some that are not. Communication, probably first and foremost, right? Absolutely. How many of your clients use them to look for jobs? To gain information? I heard some people talking about they need to get hours, right? For myself as well, I have to get hours. I can do a lot of that digitally to keep my license and my certification up to date. The ease of things. How many of you are talking and maybe you're doing really good about not being on your technology, like, oh, let's just Google that. And then how many of you just stay on Google? No, we get distracted because somebody texted us or, you know, something else. So those are the types of things when we think about the impact it has on us, both positive and negative. How do we pass on that positivity to the people that we're working with? How do we mitigate those risks to help them not have the same effects that maybe we're having? And then on the flip side, the disadvantages. One of the key ones for me is that overexposure. We're super quick to post. We're super quick to share. We're super quick to want friends. And I'm not necessarily talking about we, I'm talking about the adolescents and the young adults that we're working with. We have a lot of friends. There's all these gamers that are my friends. And when we hear that, for me, when I hear friend, I'm going to ask you, what do you think of? What's the definition of friend to you guys?
Somebody you spend physical time with.
Right. And
Do things together.
yeah, and the lingo, it's really amazing, I feel, the lingo that's different. I have this assumption when people are talking about friend of what they mean. And if I'm talking to the younger generation, it is different. They have a totally different, we're using the exact same word, and yet the definition in our mind is totally different. Talk to. Talk to, I haven't talked to them. You haven't, oh no, because they texted, right? So even just their language they're talking to is I've had some sort of communication with them. Very less often does it actually mean talk to. A lot more of the video chatting, so maybe they are having that, physical conversation, but just the language that we're using, the vocabulary has changed dramatically, just as we were talking about with the word privacy. The competition and complying, what do you think that means? What do you think they're complying to? What do you think they're competing with?
Well, just even with other kids,
Mm-hmm.
about, I did this, or I can do this, and then being almost bullied in a way into, well, you should try this, you should do that, and, you're not cool if you don't do
Right.
whatever, so.
And some of it's as simple as, whether it's a positive or a negative that they're saying towards another person. But one of the things that I've seen rise are these YouTube challenges. Have you seen those? Where it's like eating cinnamon or chugging so much milk, and to the point, even the Kiki dance. You guys seen that? The Drake song. There was somebody that ended up in the emergency room because they were trying to do the Kiki dance and got like hit or run over by a car. So these are things, that's the complying to two of these. We had these really positive challenges of the ice bucket, right? Which is a great thing to go on the advantage side of raising awareness, that activism, but on the flip side. So just, again, recognizing anything that, entertainment that we have for positivity can very easily fall to the other side, to a disadvantage. And then we'll get in more to the cyberbullying. Anything you guys want to add to this? Yes?
The whole idea of social influencers,
Yeah.
I think it's has its positive and also its negative. And I think youth, they are developing a false sense of reality by watching these influencers, either it's YouTube or
Yes.
Instagram or whatever. And I think that distracts even from doing the regular work because, I can have a career into this.
I mean, think about the kids that are opening packages and are making thousands of dollars as like 5-year-olds because they're opening and showing off little toys. And that is something, right, because those are the people they follow. So in their mind, wow, all of these YouTubers are making so much money. And I actually have a video of a high school athlete that was trying to do exactly that and the impact that that had on his future, because that they truly think that this is something that they can do. Even vloggers or bloggers, fashion, there are some kids that are great at hair, right? And maybe they even want to go to cosmetology school. That's an advantage, that they can find videos and practice. They can post their own videos and get followers. But is that where it stops for them? And no, right? We want that. So that's where I think that encouragement has to come of, those are great places to go. Those are great assets. It's a great place for you to have followers, to have people like you, have people follow you. That might challenge you to do better and better, hopefully, but that's not where it stops for you. That's got to be where it starts for you. So jumping kind of back into gaming, just reminding us of all of the wide variety of places that kids, even adults, are going. There are the consoles all the way up to mobile, so it's a wide variety of places that we can go to access games, from free to costly. So looking at who is gaming. So you can see majority of men in that young adult range are gamers, and I was actually surprised to see that almost half of women in that same bracket are also gamers. Any of you gamers consider yourself to be an actual gamer? What do you mind sharing? Like what type?
Sure. I have an Xbox, I have a PC as well. But the types of games I play are usually sport games.
Okay.
Like FIFA, Madden, such.
Yeah, I would say as many adolescents that game, like Grand Theft Auto, those type of more violent games, just as many are playing the sports games and the things like Minecraft and Fortnite that are actually sometimes, using a talent and things like that. So the good and bad of that, there is a lot of problem solving in a lot of those games. If you're familiar with things like Fortnite and Minecraft, there is a lot of that problem solving. Obviously, there's risks that come along with anything where you can interact with other people. There are the free games, but on the flip side, there's a lot of those in-app purchases typically in those games. And then probably the most important one, the addiction, but also the communication. Any thoughts on the social media gaming questions, anything you guys want to share? I know sometimes when it's not the world you're in, it can be overwhelming or it could be super boring as well. So just want to make sure that we're answering any questions that you guys have. So, yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm
that's
jumping
okay.
in too much.
No, please.
One of the things I think about this part is important to notice is that at the end, it's about the dollar. The information that is put online by watching all these different streams or anything else comes down to dollar. And I don't think that youth are aware of that presence. And I think as we talk about this type of information, we should be aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because for a YouTuber, more views is more money.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same time, you give up so much information, even in terms of following and all these other things. And you expose yourself to bullying and everything else along the way.
For sure. I think the top place that the bullying is occurring, especially on places like YouTube, is in the comment section. So if you've ever actually gone to the comment section of a YouTube video, that is where you'll start to see some of that negativity come out for them. And I think to your point is people will do whatever, whether it's the apps themselves or the people trying to make money on YouTube. It comes down to them making money over the humans, I think is the point that you're trying to make, over the humans that are using it and the safety. And so you do see a lot of times it's not until something happens that like, oh, we have to protect ourselves, right? So then after something negative happens, oh, we have to do something. And are they really? I don't know. If you read through all the terms of service, I don't know if you'd find how much privacy we actually have, to your point, right?
So when you have younger children in particular going on YouTube to watch videos, and there's a lot of nice videos that they can see, animals, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But is it possible to put settings on there that they can't get into anywhere bad?
Yeah, I mean,
obviously there are, but I mean, are they really effective, I guess is what I'm asking?
If you have, talking about younger kids, so I have a 4.5-year-old nephew who loves YouTube. So there is a YouTube Kids. When it first launched, it was not great because they were not filtering it appropriately, essentially. It has gotten better. If you have on the regular YouTube, there is a restricted mode. That's pretty easy to turn on and off, though. So you have the younger kids, they may eventually figure it out. You've got adolescents, they're gonna go in right away.
10-year-old.
Yeah, there are restricted modes that you can put into place and it will pop up and say like, sorry, you can't watch this video in restricted mode or something to that effect, so you can do that.
That is effective in keeping those bad
If it's on,
out. If
yeah,
it's on,
yeah.
it's effective in keeping
Yeah, I can't say 100%, but you know, songs that have curse words in it, I've had things pop up in restricted mode that I was shocked that were on restricted mode. But then on the other side, you're like, why is this coming through? So there's always gonna be, you know, those few that get through and the few that you're like, why is this on there? But yeah, there is.
YouTube's also made it very simple for the adolescents to create their own YouTube channel. So they can post their own videos, and you might not know that they've got it.
Anything else? Thank you. So what do we do to protect ourselves? So who are you linked to? Who you are linked to says a lot about you. So you may be posting very appropriately, but then you may have people that you're linked to that are not. Obviously true as well for our youth and young adults. We don't have control over what other people are going to do or say. We have control over how we respond and how we link ourselves to them. So as youth and young adults go to make more of those updated profiles, being aware of who they're linking themselves to. If a friend is public, it's going to be very easy to have access then to them. If they're private, I can just go and look at who you're linked to see more about you. So just recognizing if I search you and can't really get to you, the next step I'm going to take is who are you linked to? Because that's going to say a lot about you. So just reminding our youth and young adults about that. What do our posts say about us? We have the right to our opinions. We have the right to what we want to share, but we don't necessarily get to determine how others are going to interpret that. In this very highly political, tense world we have right now, it's very easy to go on a rant and really maybe have the best of intentions, but then who sees that and how they interpret it is out of our control at that point. So that goes back to those privacy settings. Again, I may be difficult to get to, but who I'm linked to may be very easy. Anybody ever set a Google alert? So setting a Google alert for your name, it could be your name, where you work, spouses, family members, maybe even friends if you are constantly tagged in things with them. Setting a Google alert for nicknames you have, I mean, your usernames, your email. You may be surprised of all the things that come up with that. And then I would encourage the adolescents and young adults that you work with to do the same. On the parent side, you can require permission in like the App Store and things like that where you have to type in a totally separate password for them to even download something. And you can do the same for those in-app purchases. As a parent, again, I don't know for you guys that are parents at what age, oh yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm naive or whatever, but how do you set a Google alert?
So if you, it has to be through your Gmail. And in your Gmail, you can go into the settings and set Google alerts.
Okay.
So like for this job, I would set, cyberbullying and youth. So you can set certain keywords, and then you can set how often you want to get the emails to say that your name has popped up.
If you go into like settings of your Gmail.
Yeah, maybe at the break, I can pull up and kind of walk through that.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. Yes.
Melissa, I always recommend too, when we work with job seekers, that you always Google your own name
Mm-hmm.
to see what comes up under it. And, you'd be surprised how many commonly known as people or things that, are affiliated with you. It could be good or bad, you
Mhm.
don't know, but it's always good to know that because people do Google your name when they're looking through job search.
Oh, for sure.
So
For
we
sure.
always recommend that. And we tell people as young as we can to always be aware of what could be out there, but you
Yeah.
need to know by Googling your own name.
Yep.
And often,
And yeah, I think if you have a common name, it's good to know what's out there about that name, right? Because like you said, there may be negative things that you don't have control over that, but it's good to know that it's out there. And then also tying in then maybe other things about you. So if there's a John Smith in this same area, that might be troublesome, right? Because you need to know about that person, but also then recognizing where those people are. So if somebody's asking you about something, you could say, oh, I know that's a common name. I've seen that too. That's not me, something to that effect. But just knowing what's out there that's related to your name is definitely a good idea. So planning for the unexpected, so that would be one example, something coming up on a Google search that is unexpected to you. If it is something that you truly think is about you, there are ways to try and get things taken down. Often places have different, and I'll go through some examples in a little bit, but there are ways to contact the website, send an email, whether it's a social media or whether it's on a different, just general website that you can ask them to take that information down. And then again, as a parent, you may want to set Google alerts for your own children. I know that there's a lot of people, you can make Facebooks for young kids where it's just more or less like an archive, but that kid's name is actually used. So even a 3-year-old can essentially be tagged in a picture on Facebook. So now that's right there is starting that digital footprint for that child. One other just quick kind of tidbit, the parent and child connection, so you can put on a lot of those sites that somebody's your mom, somebody's your child, you're related in different ways. Thinking about when you're doing password protection, one of the questions is that mother's maiden name. And then if I know who your mother is, I now know her maiden name. So a lot of people that get married like to have their first and last name current, but they may include their maiden name, right? So now if I have that I'm your child, now they know my mother's maiden name. Does that make sense? So just different, that's just one example of things to keep in mind. If one of it's like, what's your dog's name? If you're always posting about Fluffy, I now know your dog's name. So there's a lot of those password protection that ages ago were really great because most people didn't know much about my mom. But now with all of this wide way that we can network and connect with each other, we know so much about so many people. And people that want to steal your identity have a lot of time and will do that searching to find that information about people, those easy targets that they might see. I know one of the things we were talking about was just how do we better prepare adolescents and young adults to have this knowledge at this age. And one of the things we talked about was starting that education early, right? We could say that if they have that moral compass or know right from wrong at a young age, hopefully that will filter into adolescence and young adulthood, but we know that's not always true. Some of you may know this, but in schools, it is mandated that every year in 3rd through 12th grade, that schools give some sort of digital safety education to those ages. Typically, when I was doing the presentations, we would even hit the kindergartners. I think it's never hurts to even just talk about the difference between like in-person stranger danger. What does that look like online? What do you do if you're on your mommy's phone and you get a phone call? You don't answer, like just different basic things. So hopefully then they start hearing that same message. And then by the time they are young adults, they have that, further background knowledge. But we know for this, the current adolescents and young adults, that mandate was not necessarily in place when they were in 3rd grade. So it is kind of trying to remediate and quickly teach kind of on the fly, which can be difficult. Anything else that came up that you guys would like to share, thoughts that you had, or things maybe you wish we had talked about prior? Hopefully we'll hit most of that as we go. So getting into some of the dangers that we see, cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is kind of a goofy word because as you leave the schools, it's not necessarily called cyberbullying. So in the schools, it's defined as, the key points I just want to point out here is willful, so that it was deliberate, it is repeated, and it is harmful. And if you've worked with kids, that's something that if they say, I'm bullied, that's typically the questions that we would ask. Do you know that they did it on purpose? Is it repeated? How often? Not that like a one-time major thing can't be considered bullying or cyberbullying, but typically that's what is going to look for. And then the cyber part comes into play when it's on a digital device. So as we get older, the word kind of turns into harassment. Doesn't necessarily change the definition, but just the word that we use is a little bit different. So again, it's that repeatedly, the things that we might look for would be those hurtful comments. So look, we were talking in like the YouTube comments, that's oftentimes where we see that happening on there. Threats, rumors, pictures, videos, something that's recorded potentially. Sometimes I hear things about like on the school bus where they're recording something, maybe making fun of the kid or even physically harming the kid. And then that when we talk about harassment, the words that were really poignant were aggressive pressure or intimidation, which again, it's similar to those threats, but just as we get older, the words become maybe more sophisticated. And then again, repetition and that intent. So those are the two things that it's going to come back to when it comes to legality. Those are the types of things that they're going to look at. Anything you want to add to definitions or questions you have about that? So why does anybody participate? When we're talking about online, when we're talking about digital, it just looks often different. When we're not face-to-face with somebody, for some reason we get courage that doesn't exist when we are face-to-face with somebody. So that impulsivity, it's really easy to type, hit send, and not really think about it. You're not seeing the reaction of the person you're talking to. You're not getting that immediate consequence. So it's very easy to be quick and impulsive. That lack of problem solving. When there's not as much face-to-face that our adolescents and young adults are experiencing, that problem solving and that conflict resolution tends to decrease. And when we talk about video games, I can just quit and start over. If I die in a video game, what happens? I get a new life, I get to try again. If I don't like something on social media, I can block them, I can delete them, I can delete my post and repost. Right? So that problem solving is like just this quick fix, this Band-Aid. So now if we actually have to apply it, it's a lot more difficult. Being provoked It's very easy for me to say something to you, you then to want to reply to me, and now we have this back and forth. Where again, if it was in person, I could easily just walk away, or I may not like the intimidation that I'm experiencing, and so then I choose to leave or she chooses to leave. And I had mentioned this, but I'll repeat it, that immediate consequence or that accountability in that moment, it may be months before somebody says, oh, I saw this or I heard about this. And then it's like, I didn't do that. And it's, in my mind, it's so not important, right? And so when you want to give me a consequence, I know with kids I experience, if it happened yesterday, what do you mean? I didn't do that. Oh yeah, remember? It's so out of their mind because today's this new start, right? And so again, online, where things live on forever, but after I've posted it, I've pretty much disconnected from it. And if somebody comments, maybe I'll go look at it, maybe not, but if somebody comments, I may not be provoked. So what do I want to do? Respond back, right? So just recognizing what that looks like. If we can teach this in person, we've also got to teach of how that looks digitally. But if we have it for in-person communication, we can hopefully then apply it when we're on those digital mediums. So this just kind of repeats that definition, but gets a little bit more specific as to what it might look like. And then how can we respond in a more positive way? The best thing would be to just not participate, right? In a perfect world, we're just not participating in that. But when we see it happening, there are ways on these mediums to report anonymously. If I report you, it is not going to send you a message saying Melissa reported you. So that is a quick, easy way to do something without having to be directly engaged in it. If you do see something, screenshotting that evidence is actually very important. So screenshotting, that is a really good thing to do. If it's a message or something like that, saving the message, privately supporting that victim. So if I know that something happened to you, maybe I'm Facebook messaging you or texting you, just recognizing, hey, I saw what happened, and letting that person know privately that I support them. If we talked a little bit earlier about blocking, I personally think blocking is like one of the best things that they've offered us. Because it does not alert, they're gonna realize you blocked them, but it does not alert them. They now have zero access to me. That does not mean they can't go and find, create a new account, but if they're gonna take that much effort, it's probably a bigger issue. If there is somebody bullying you and you block them, what often do the friends do? I go tell you everything I saw that person said, right? So really, like, the whole blocking, then it defeats the purpose. So if somebody's harming my friend, I would suggest that whole crew blocking the person that's doing the bullying. And then just thinking, we were talking about the THINK acronym. So is it thoughtful? Is it helpful? I cannot remember right now what the I stands for. Does anybody remember? Is it necessary, and is it kind, is that acronym. So before you're posting, if you stop and think of those things, we talked about, like, oh yeah, if that person looks ugly in that dress, I'm helping them out by telling them they look ugly, right? So there are gonna always be those people that have some other way around being kind, but generally if we just think before we post, and it's simple as, would you want your mom to see it? Would you want your grandma to see it? Would you want your employer to see it? Would you want your boyfriend or girl? So we could say all of that, but ultimately it needs to come down from the heart of that person, right? Is it something that they want out there representing them for whoever to see? Even if this is my personal account and it is private, as we said, the word private has a totally different definition right now. Any other suggestions you have for just staying away from the drama, whether it involves you or not?
I hide people.
Yeah, you don't have to, yeah. Do you want to explain a little bit about what hiding means?
Well,
How it's different than blocking,
yeah,
essentially?
so they can see everything and you're still friends with them, but, so I have some people that I don't feel that I can delete as friends because they are family, but I don't like the stuff that they post,
Yeah.
so I just hide them, so I never see any of their posts. They can still see me, comment
Yeah.
on everything, I just don't wanna see what they post.
So essentially you're still connected, but you don't have to see what pops up on theirs all the time. And anything that you're hearing about that you're like, how do I do that? I'm happy to stay after and show you guys that. But also if you go to Facebook to their help, they have a help center, or excuse me, any of the social media that you guys are on have different, some of them call it a help center, but that is essentially what it is. You can just search in their browser for their help center, hiding, blocking, reporting, different things like that. And there's different purposes for reporting. So you may report something that is, you may deem like illegal essentially. You may report something because you don't think that it's, true or factual, or maybe it's yours and you want it taken down. So there's different reasons you can report as well.
There is one thing that I want to make everybody aware of. I think youth, right now in this room, we're very focused on Facebook, but youth are leaving Facebook.
You're right, I'm saying Facebook a lot more. I am using that like we use the word Kleenex,
Yes.
if that makes sense.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
thank you for pointing that out. I do tend to lean towards Facebook, but you're right. Typically the youth, especially younger adolescents, are not there. They left when we all joined, right? Yeah. Yeah, so if we go back to looking at the top on the App Store, it is the YouTubes, the Snapchats, the Instagrams where they're posting videos and things like that. So talking it out, communication is one of the best things that we can do to help with prevention and to help with remediation. So discussing what to do, practicing, planning, giving scenarios. If you hear something in the news, especially if it's in the age group that you are working with, sharing that story. What do you think that person was thinking? Why do you think they did that? How would you handle this? How do you think it's going to impact them? I'll share a couple stories with you guys here in a few minutes, but using those real life scenarios is going to make it less like, oh, why are you bothering me with that again? That's never going to happen to me. When they see it happening to somebody who is considered a peer, and it's not just you making up the story, they're going to be able to better relate to it. Or even having your youth together communicating, asking them to find stories. There's a guy that I'm going to show you that was essentially a YouTuber. So it's him telling a story very YouTube. There's things in news articles. So if you set those alerts, you'll get some of those news stories, and you can even encourage the people that you're working with to do the same. Communication, teaching that respect. What does empathy look like online? Do they even know what empathy is? We're not necessarily teaching youth empathy these days, so what does that mean? What does it mean to, be in somebody else's shoes, especially if I don't even really know them? So how does that apply online? Even in gaming, that's one of the places that you hear a lot of language, because there are kids who are 8 gaming with grown-ups, because they're all playing the same thing, which that's fine, but then thinking about what that language might look like between them and how they're connecting. Understanding the devices, knowing that things like Snapchat are not just pictures. There is a whole world inside of Snapchat that people have access to when they join that. And then something that I actually personally do as well is my technology, I don't sleep with it. It's out. I know if you have families and things like that, that might be a different story, but you can set do not disturb, and you can have specific phone numbers that are the only ones that can come through to actually alert you. So just if you're setting those and you're sharing examples of things that you do and encouraging them not only for your own children, but for the people that you work with. Anything you guys would like to add to that? So looking at the legal side, we kind of talked about the harassment. So when it's, the 18 plus or it's happening outside of the school, harassment and obscene communications, intent does matter. So in the legal language, it uses phrases like intent to offend, intent to abuse, so that they are going to look at that. And that's where evidence, so screenshots and things like that, are going to come into play, not just assuming that if I realize I did something that was harassing to you, do you think I'm going to keep it on my feed? No. So having those screenshots is going to be really important. And then cyber stalking is something that falls kind of within that same realm. And some of the language that's used is that there is a fear for safety, there is emotional distress, and there's threats, and it would have to be proven. So the legal side is a little bit more difficult than taking the safety precautions that you can take on your own end with the blocking, the reporting, and disconnecting from the individual. In cyber stalking, when you talk about them not being able to access an individual via technology, is extremely difficult for law enforcement to enforce, essentially. And then here's just a quick note that it that I found on there, that there's a new law that came out in regards to cyber stalking to better protect, and specifically to Illinois, from the use of technology. She is, I know she's leaving soon, but she is a huge advocate for the technology world and the crimes against people, essentially. So Illinois has been top in some of the laws that have been coming out in regards to technology-based crimes. So sexting. You can look here at some of the things that were highlighted. 12-year-olds are sexting. It is a small amount, but just they highlighted that 12-year-olds are sexting. So what does that mean as they get older? Maybe they'll learn their lesson. If they don't, maybe they'll just continue. So 12% of students, and this was specific if you look at the age, so we'll hit the older individuals as well. But if you look at this age, 12% of students have sent an image in their lifetime. 1 out of every 5, and this was specific to 17-year-olds, did so at one point in their lifetime. And then just thinking about the developmental difference between 12 and 17. So why do you think teenagers, focusing on teenagers right now, why do you think they're engaging in this behavior?
Lack of self-confidence.
Yeah, self-confidence is huge, huge role.
I sat in on another kind of cyber safety workshop once, and the lady who did that one said that it's becoming more of a normal part of dating relationship
Yeah.
now with teenagers. It's just everyone does it, or there's that perception that everyone does it, so it's not a big deal. I love them.
Yeah.
They love me. Like normally, because we don't typically, you used to go out and do stuff. Now you just text each other instead of being face to face.
Right.
So that's where that. Like,
This kind of
sending
natural progression. Yeah.
because normally things would progress
Physically.
together, and now you're not physically together in a lot of cases when you're dating somebody.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
the progression.
Yeah. I think you hit on a couple key points. That conforming, right? In their mind, is everybody doing it? And it might just be because the boy or the girl said everybody's doing it. It might be because their peer group is doing it. It might be because of the self-confidence, they want that attention. It might be because they love them, right? And again, we have to kind of get down to their world and the lingo and the vocab that they're using. What does that mean to them? You could probably remember being this, teen years, being young adult years. Love was, you liked to hang out with me. You thought I was pretty. You said nice things. I mean, just again, kind of getting ourselves into that world, because we could sit here and say, like, are you crazy? And no, I love them, right? In their world, forever is very different than what our world of forever is. And so just thinking about their mindset, their cognitive level, thinking about the frontal lobe, and that development is getting later and later, so their ability to think and problem solve and think about the future, thinking about tomorrow is like thinking about 10 years from now in our mind. So just, again, getting down to that level, but that conforming, or I might lose them if, and then is it becoming a norm? And that's one of the things that, as we talk about the older, the young adults, what that's looking at as well. So these pictures, when we're talking about sexting of teens, so under the age of 17, it becomes child pornography when they're under 17. And then here it talks about engaging in a sexual act, simulating a sexual act, lewd touching or fondling, and then what is in the picture. So what sexual organs are in the picture, and that includes the buttocks. So considerations, one of the things to think about as we talk about the adolescents and young adults, if it is an 18-year-old dating a 17-year-old, they may legally be able to consent to sex together, but that does not eliminate the illegal part of the images, because one is an adult and one is not an adult. So if the older one is in possession of the younger one's pictures, or if the adult is sending images to a minor. Does that make sense? So if there's an 18-year-old sending nude images to a 17-year-old, that's an adult sending adult porn, essentially, but to a minor, which can be considered illegal. If the 17-year-old sends it to the 18-year-old, now the 18-year-old is in possession of child pornography. Does that make sense? The laws, when they were written, were not written for teens sexting. What were they written for? Child predators, yeah. Adults who are in possession of, lewd child porn. So now, law enforcement having to get creative in trying not to prosecute these kids as child predators, that's becomes difficult when the children are sexting and doing that type of stuff. And so does intent matter? Like, oh, she sent it to me? If she sent it to you and you immediately said, don't want it, delete it, totally different than holding on to it, showing people, sharing it with people. So there is that we can't control what comes to us, but we can control what we do with that. And so that obviously comes into play in these types of situations. So when they're older, because sexting is newer, there's like the studies out there, there's not just, the longitudinal type of studies. So there are things that, some of them are very specific to a specific, people in a certain region, or there's some stats that I'll show you guys in a minute where it was like anybody who was a victim of, they asked in the survey. So some of the stats may be skewed, but I think it gives a good perception of kind of what's going on. So as you had mentioned, sexting in 18 plus is not only practiced, but appears to be common. So about 30% were two-way sexters, meaning the couple were sending pictures back and forth. Male respondents were more likely to be receivers, which I think is, at least for me, was a little bit surprising because we hear a lot that like the boys are the ones sending, pictures. And so then there was a Self magazine one that said about 92% of women said they had sent a sexy text. So remember, when we talk about sexting, there can be sexting where it's verbiage. Does that make sense? So where like the words are considered lewd also. So then just looking at how is technology now impacting, and you hit right on this when you were talking about relationships and how there's a lot of relationships playing out digitally. Even if you are, living together and you see each other every day, there's still so much of our relationships that are played out digitally. And then young adults sext more than teens, this survey said. So again, going back to what you said about it's becoming this norm. And then we also heard about self-esteem and self-confidence, and it may play a role in the involvement. Thoughts, questions, anything you want to add? Surprised? Maybe not surprised? So this can then lead into revenge porn. Have you guys heard of this? So this is, how would you guys define it? Because here's the legal term. What would you define revenge porn as? What happens first? What happens to make it revenge?
They have pictures, they break up, and then the other person starts showing pictures.
Yeah, so typically, you hit on a really key point. Typically, these pictures are received in a consensual relationship, meaning I willingly sent you an image, typically when they were dating, something happened, and you're now retaliating is typically the motive behind it. And that's kind of what this goes through. In the legal terms, I was actually reaching out to one of our attorneys in the bureau that I worked in. She's done a lot of like presenting and talking about and advocating for the law for revenge porn in Illinois, because right now, she reminded me that the law does not allow for minor victims, only minor defendants. So if a minor is a victim, so a 16-year-old is a victim, this law does not cover them in the revenge porn. But if they're the one that sent the picture, then they could be, which is kind of strange. But so the victim has to be at least 18 years old, and then it is that essentially sexting image that gets out. And then the key points here are that the receiver, so the offender essentially, should have, a reasonable person would know that that picture was just meant for them, and that person should have known that the victim didn't want the picture disseminated. So here are just some stats on that. There are about 2,000 revenge porn sites. 90% of revenge porn victims in this specific sample were women. And then they talk about the emotional distress. The point, though, also is the victim and the person posting is essentially going to be impacted, because there are more and more, you'll see down at the bottom, If you're at the sites, there's specific forms and email addresses. So even social media, a lot of them do have ways for you to contact them specifically in regards to the revenge porn. And then these down here are other sites that are kind of like advocates and supports for victims of revenge porn. And right now there's only 38 states with actual laws in place. And they're, for pretty much state to state, the definition and the punishment for it is different.
So people are actually going on a website to post pictures of people?
Yes.
Like this is, but you don't have to do that in order to be prosecuted, right? It's just if you're sending it?
It could be just if you're sending it, but there's that, gonna go back to the definition. So retaliation is often the motivating factor, so was the intent to harm. So if they just sent it to a buddy, like, oh, hey, check her out, and then the buddy went and did, kind of posted for retaliation, that person posting in the, retaliation or revenge way would be essentially. Does not mean that the initial receiver could not have some sort of impact as well. Yeah, good question.
People that actually go on a revenge porn site to post a picture of something.
If there's 2,000 sites,
Yeah, that's
a lot.
I just didn't even realize.
And that's just
People are
revenge.
like, I'm gonna find your site to
Isn't that?
put on. I don't know. It's weird.
There's a good John Oliver clip, if you guys are familiar with him, that actually talks about revenge porn. That's just kind of really interesting in looking at the perspective of the victim and how many people and the impact that it has on that individual. I mean, think about, a grown, as it says, typically women, just going about their day doing their job, and all of a sudden these images pop up. I mean, what do you do at that point? So then it does come back to, if we see it's fairly common at this, I mean, it kind of goes back to almost the questions we were talking about. How do we prep adolescents and young adults for just making a good digital footprint, let alone all of these people that are grown-ups that are engaging, because they're in a consensual relationship, and maybe they are exchanging photos. So it may not even be that it's only the woman sending the pictures. She may have pictures of, the man as well, and we lose control the second that we hit send, essentially. Any questions about that? This is new, developing. I would expect that some of this changes over, pretty quickly over time. So we also have sextortion. Essentially, this is when a nude image is out there. And actually, there's been sextortion cases where initially the perpetrator did not even have an image of the individual, but they got an image through acting as if they did. So this is the one, are you guys familiar with what sextortion is? Would anybody want to, if they do, share? So essentially sextortion typically would be the individual being targeted has sent an image or a video, a sexed image or video, and the perpetrator is now saying, I will share this with your family, I will post this on your, to everybody at your work, I will email, everybody at your work, something to that effect, unless you fill in the blank. And so it's money, meet up for sexual acts, send me more images, things to that effect. So this was, as I was mentioning, a targeted survey, meaning the only people that responded were people that were victims. So most of the victims were women. About half of them were under 18 when it began. Most actually knew the perpetrator. So they may have even been in a relationship at one point in time. They were contacted multiple different ways. Most of the offenders actually lied about who they were. So they did not say, oh, it's, John or whoever. All of the cases, I believe it said all that were prosecuted, all of the offenders were male. And they were repeat offenders, meaning this wasn't the first time that they had engaged in that behavior. And most of them only involved youth and teens that were victimized. So there was a case when I was at the AG's office, I think it was up in Lake County, where it was actually boys who were targeted I know there was one case where boys were targeted by another boy at their school, and the offender lied about who they were initially. I believe he posted as like a pretty young teen, and then the other was a older male who lured them. I don't remember who it was, but he lured them, and at least one of the boys went. And luckily, the mom had found it before he got there, and the police arrived as well. But just to give a point that it does happen to boys as well. Yeah.
The last two slides, I think we're missing.
Yeah, there are some. I apologize. There are some that so I will share with Mary and get that out to you. Thank you.
Thanks.
So potential outcomes. We talked about a lot of these, but just looking at the widespread impact that just one decision could make, and this is not, as we just saw, does not just happen to young teens and young adults. But the loss of relationship, the loss of jobs, impacted reputation, and that can really take a toll to the point that it impacts their daily life, right? That they no longer have a job, they no longer have those relationships, and that emotional distress really takes hold of them. So going into the predator piece, we kind of touched on it with the sextortion, but they're everywhere, essentially. If you're familiar with grooming, this typically starts as, it could be something they game together, it could be mutual friends, it could be some of these apps that kids go to, because I don't know if you've heard of like chat roulette and things like that, where you can video chat or chat with anybody from around the world. And at first they might just sound fun, right? Adolescents and even young adults are at an age that risk-taking is actually natural part of their development. It just looks a lot different when they're on a digital platform that accesses them to the entire world. And so it starts as that, friendship building, trust, and then starts to pull them away from people that they trust. If you've heard, we're about to do Erin's Law at our school. If you've heard of Erin Marin, where she was sexually abused by, for her it was family, friends, but just it was an in-person thing, but she kind of tells her story about how was telling her, if you tell people, nobody are going to believe you, or you're going to be the one that has a negative impact because look at what you've done. So they start to engage them in behavior that then they feel ashamed for, or they are told that, don't you like it? Don't you like when I tell you that you're pretty? When you send me these pictures. So it's just those different ways of getting them to be attached and then detached from others, and there's a reliance then on the individual that's grooming them. In more of the adult world, we see the catfishing. Have you guys seen the show Catfish? I don't know if it's even out anymore, but what does that mean? Like if you're in that adult world, what does catfishing mean? Pretending to be somebody you're not for what? What is the gain? Yeah, typically some sort of relationship. Typically the ones we see, it's that romantic relationship. We've even seen it played out in the sports world, right, where there's been some professional athletes who have been catfished. I'd like to show you a quick video. Actually, I'm going to skip this just for time's sake, and if we have time, come back. I will share the link. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Is that good? Okay. So in talking about it, don't create fear. If we just tell them, don't go there, don't do this, this is going to happen to you, whether it's younger kids or young adults, what do they want to do now? Go there, right? Because now they want to see, are you sure? Or I want to see, and especially digitally, we don't know the impact or see the impact initially, because if I'm safe in my home, how can you get me, right? And I think that's true sometimes for grown-ups as well, whether it's online dating, whether it's just trying out new things. If I'm safe in this space I call my bedroom, nobody can get me. And we forget the reach that the digital world has. So don't create fear. Obviously, we want to say this is real, this can happen, but we don't want to make it so fearful that we don't talk about it anymore because you're just not going to do it. So talk about it. And then recognize if somebody starts to talk about, it's so basic to say don't share personal information, and yet so often we do without even recognizing it. We get comfortable in conversation when we're, especially in the gaming world where you have that headset and you can communicate, or you're just typing back and forth. It's so easy when you're having fun. Oh, where do you go to school? What grade are you in? Things like that. where do you work, where do you live, just simple things that if they're not gonna walk up and say, what's your name, where do you live? Can I come over? Do you wanna hang out later? No, but we are hanging out because we're hanging out online. And so the whole perception of what when we talk about stranger danger in person, it's so obvious, right? But when it's online, we have these other personas, but when we're having fun, that guard starts to go down. Just simply me saying on my profile where I live or where I check in, if I constantly am checking in, or my Instagram app is showing all my pictures around the same place, I probably live there, right? So just not assuming that privacy, kind of going back to that piece again. And then if they start asking for personal information or start talking about sexual stuff, I know this seems so basic, and yet here we have all these stats of things that are happening, right? So just recognizing that, as basic as it sounds, we have to continue to talk about it. So here's just a quick news story that just came out really recently. So there were arrests of 24 alleged, I'm sorry, I did add this recently because I just saw this the other day. So there's people that are looking to take advantage, and they have more options than ever because there's so much more to places to go nowadays, and so many more people are on those places. So they are lurking everywhere. I just read an article, they're on Fortnite, and there was something that happened on there recently. And then it just says that they're ready to strike. They're attempting to lure and elicit sex is what that says. And then some of them, so we talked about how Tinder used to have that lower age rating. We can't just assume kids are not going to places just because you're not supposed to be there. And even if you are allowed to be there, so thinking even about the older adolescents and young adults, apps like Tinder, even apps like Snapchat, we have access to people and we want those followers and those friends. It's really a prize to have all of those followers and friends, and likes can be a competition. So in this case, all of the suspects were men. One of the other things to keep in mind, we have this image of what a predator or a bad guy looks like, and we forget that very often they're varied in age and all walks of life. We see all the time the people that are being arrested who are not the scary boogeyman, right? And in this case, the men thought they were chatting with 14 and 15-year-olds, and then in this specific case, they were actually talking to detectives. And they just show some warning signs. If children appear to be anxious, they don't want to talk about certain things, that might be a note. And just again, reiterating, even for us, not everybody on the other end is who they say they are. So why don't people report? What do you, in your mind, in your maybe experiences even, what's the number one reason? Embarrassment? You guys agree with that? Yeah, I think embarrassment, I always also think what could happen? If I don't admit it, if I just pretend like it doesn't happen, if I just try to handle it myself, nothing more bad can happen, and that's when it just gets worse and worse and worse. So I also think the uninformed piece, I think this generation, the young adults and adolescents, do not have a great background in education of digital safety because it just was so new when they were younger. And so they've just kind of, gone along with the changes. And in a lot of ways, they probably are smarter than us in a lot of the technology. But when it comes to just their ability to think reasonably and think with foresight, that is not necessarily going to be their strong suit. And so that uninformed piece of this moment lasts forever when it's digitally, and so we've got to be prepared for this moment. And so I personally think one of the best things we can do for them is talk about it. There is no magic pill. There's not one thing that we can say that's going to work for everybody. You could have two kids in the exact same household and they go about things very differently. So that communication, that checking up, I know the people you're working with are not your own children necessarily, so you can't do all of this at home, but educating them and educating their parents as well to inform them so they can help inform the youth. And they may not report because nothing worked in the past. So again, continuing to talk to them. If they've blocked and the person just recreated, what's the point? If they reported on the site or the app and nothing happened, why am I going to do that again? So it's constantly giving them resources, resources are changing and more becoming available. So being educated on that and educating the kids. Again, a lot of times they are smarter than us. They're just not necessarily looking for the protections, right, or the preventions. So helping them do that.
I think they're afraid they're gonna get in trouble.
For sure, for sure.
They did something wrong that caused this to happen,
Mm-hmm.
and so they don't wanna.
Especially in the sexting and the sextortion and the revenge porn, because they sent the picture, that like right there, that can be a shutdown for them. So again, that communication, letting them know, like in this case, you're a victim. There may be consequences for you sending that initial picture, but right now you're the victim. And so let's deal with that. So empowering them. So really empowering them is giving them the knowledge. Creating an escape plan. This can work for all ages. You have, you know what, as a parent, even as an advocate, teaming up kids with each other. If something's wrong, text me, Blue Moon, and I'll come get you from, you know, wherever you're at. So having some sort of escape plan or plan for them that in that moment, if they get themselves into something, that they know who they can text or who they can reach out to for safety. We talked about blocking, reporting, disconnecting, discussing the case studies, so like those news stories, reminding kids that their short-sightedness of like, this is cool now, there's a permanency to that. And one easy way to show them is, depending on their age, have them Google themselves right there. Have them go into their Snapchat or their Instagram or their Twitter or their Facebook and pull up their page. What all can I see? How far can I go back? Sometimes it's funny to look back to, you know, 2014 and see what was posted back then, but they may be surprised. There's so much that they've probably forgot about. They may not use their Facebook anymore because it's not cool, but it's still there. And so I have access to it. And they'll, oh, I forgot my password. Oh, I forgot my email I used. Okay, so you're just going to leave it there? Is that your answer to that? And yes, for a lot of people, that is their answer. So just that permanency, if they can see somebody, we were talking about the billboard, right? Like pretend your feed was a billboard. Would you walk around with it? No. And we could say the same thing with sexting. Would you walk around nude in front of all these people? No. So why are you sending that image? So just putting it into the real world example, or Google the people that you work with before you see them the next time. And just start saying things about them that you learned. And they'll probably like, what? How'd you know that? Like, oh, your Aunt Sarah, you know, like, how do you know I have an Aunt Sarah? Oh, I just Googled you. So showing them and bringing it into the real world, what if somebody asks you at a job about this? What if you're applying for a scholarship and this comes up? There was something I read in a news article that talks about a kid who just simply posted weed paraphernalia, and that every time he's Googled, that image comes up. And he may have deleted it, but so what? So just showing them those real world examples, I think, matters. Yeah.
I do leadership sessions with our students, and I talked about this with them, had them Google themselves, and several of them said, oh no, I created a new Facebook account, different name, and nobody could retrieve that stuff. And so then I shared examples, like you said, how another student lost a job because exactly what you were talking about with the weed, but this kid was just at a party and people were drinking, and he had been going to school to be a security guard through JJC and lost all that just because they saw that picture on Facebook.
And it doesn't matter if it's not your picture. And that's another thing. If you're tagged and your friend is public, you can untag yourself, doesn't mean the picture's gone. You're holding a red Solo cup. You must be drinking. No, it's water. You know, like, so just helping them recognize that you don't get to decide my perception. What I see, what I think when I see that, that's on me. You don't get to decide it. You could plead and tell me, no, that's, you know. Because that's also, when you're thinking about scholarships, jobs, you're now representing them. And so, especially when I was at the AG's office, my name's all over the place of places I've been and things that I've done. So anybody before I come could have searched me. And what if I had things like that out there? Would you trust me as much? Probably not. So just thinking about that perception, I don't get to decide your perception of me, especially if you've searched me beforehand. You're going to come in with that preconceived notion. And even if I try to tell you otherwise, it doesn't really matter because you've come in with that information and that notion. So what are some ways you can and you will talk to the people you work with. So the Googling is a good example. What are some other things that you can do in your specific roles? Or maybe you have done that you think might benefit others.
I told my daughter when we got her first phone that I said anything you do, she doesn't know differently, but I figured it was better to do this now.
Yeah.
But I said anything that you have or do on that phone, I can see.
Yep.
And so before you send anything, make sure, regardless of what platform it is, that you understand that, because I can see what you're doing. But as educators and people working with youth, that is probably a key element, because you can tell the youth, everything that you do, I can see.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you can or not, it doesn't matter. They need to know that
Yeah.
you can come back.
I can find you.
It's a different perception
yeah.
for her now, because now she's really careful, and she's like, oh gosh, I don't want my mom to see this.
Yeah, and really as a parent, you can get all their texts. You actually can set up through another app to see what's on their feeds, right? You can have, I will have your password to your phone, or you don't have a phone, right? So also reminding them, if you're working at some age, they're gonna start paying for their own bills, but there's probably still even some young adults who don't. So ultimately, if something's done on that device, not only is the youth in trouble, but their parent is, especially if they're under the age of 18. So letting them know, kind of, I'm watching. And that's good for kids, up until a certain age. If they can blame you as a parent, just tell them I'm watching, you can't do that, or don't say that. I mean, having that out can be helpful up until a certain age as well. What else do you guys do? Or things that you think you can bring back to the people that you work with? If you think of something, raise your hand. So this is just a quote that I thought was kind of important for us that are kind of out of this generation to think about. So imagine that your body and head are full of hormones, believing no one can imagine or have experienced what you are going through right now, and yet everyone is watching you. You are growing up in an always-on society, and your parents can't relate. You are gaining no guidance from your frontal lobe and have a lengthy list of demands such as class, grades, tests, sports, clubs, a job, family, and a social life, in person and digital, with immediate, constant uploads. That's what they're going through. And they're right, most of us can't relate, right? And so they really think that, like, our advice, they don't always take it right away, right? Because they think we can't relate. And so that communication, and then even holding each other accountable, can be really helpful. So having them Google each other, having them practice, whether it's interviews or things like that, and questioning each other. So have them do some investigation. And now you Googled me and I Googled you, now I'm gonna interview you based off of some of the things I found. Or would you hire them based on some of the things you found? So having them hold each other accountable and doing that together, but just keeping in mind our inability in some ways to relate, so we do have to kind of get down to that level. Think about the vocabulary they're using, what all of that must mean, because we did probably all of this except for that immediate uploads, right? I worked when I was in high school, I was in a sport, not necessarily a club, but I had family, I had grades, I had tests, I had a social life. So we did all of that except for that always on part, right? Which does add, I know for myself as a grown-up, it adds a totally different layer to my current life as well, let alone being that age. So they keep saying, I think like every time that I go online and look at this frontal lobe stuff, they've moved the age back of when it's fully developed. So that just simply means that there's more years without assistance from that emotional regulation, critical thinking, problem solving, planning for the future, considering consequences, and abstract thinking. So up through, they're saying now between 25 and 35. That's dramatic. And then for us to expect them to make good decisions, you know, we've got to have expectations, but we've also got to know where they're coming from. So one of the things that they mention, not that we can necessarily say, go outside and play, but that's one of the things that they're recommending, as well as the guidance and encouragement. So again, I'll also share this video on technology addiction from Rob Weiss with you guys. So here are some things. I just pulled these from the social emotional learning standards from the State Board of Ed. This obviously just goes up through seniors in high school. I won't read through all of them, but I encourage you to browse through their self-management, self-awareness and external supports, social awareness. I encourage you to read through these. It's really fascinating. If they're on here as standards, what does that mean? If this is a standard for upper teens, that means they're still working on this. That means these are skills that they potentially have not yet developed, and I specifically pulled from junior and senior. So what you're seeing on here is specific to our 11th and 12th graders. That means they are still working on predicting how you would feel and giving or receiving help or a compliment. So basic. But that's something that as juniors and seniors in high school, they are still working on. They're still working on selecting healthy defense mechanisms, an ability to express hurt without withdrawing or blaming or aggression. So again, when you think about now adding a level of technology to that, where they have constant access to not only receive information, but to share out information, and they're still working on all of these skills, that's huge, and thinking about how they're going to respond. So again, when we go back to think about how are they going to learn this, or why are they doing this? This is why. And so if we can teach them these, it's in schools now across the state. Illinois is a leader in implementing the social emotional learning. And so they're working on this, but again, this is new. So the young adults that we have did not have this type of support necessarily in their education. And then if you think about it, as parents, if you're not in this world, are you privy to this? Probably not, right? Unless you're in the world of working with children. You're probably not privy to the SEL. Any that you guys want to focus on? I don't want to just read what's in front of you, so I'm happy to talk about it, though, if you'd like to. So our digital footprint, we talked about young age starts as a blank canvas, and then we add this layer of gaming, social media. We talked about like YouTube Kids. Then we add on things like LinkedIn and dating apps, and that creates you. We have, as I mentioned, where you can create a profile for, essentially a newborn or maybe even a baby in the womb. And now that's their digital footprint because it's their name that's being used. So then in all of that, what's being projected? What's out there? So a great tool, I think, is to have the people that you're working with searching each other. Maybe even people that don't necessarily know each other, because then you're getting that true perception of who are you. You've got what have you liked, what have you commented on, who are your friends and followers. So not only who are you friending, but who's following you, who has access to you. What pictures are you posting what are you tagged in? The filters that we now have, and Snapchat and things like that, they're super cute, right? But just the different perception that's being put out there about you. Who is your audience? And is that audience imaginary or real? If you were to ask adolescents and young adults, they're real people, right, that are watching me. But to them, who are they? Do they really have this fan base? So just giving that perception of who's out there. And then just highlighting again, if you're engaged, you have your right to your opinion, you have a right to take a stand, you have the right to advocate, but just also being aware of the perception that puts out for you.
Are there, obviously, Facebook, Google search, but are there other sites or apps where youth or younger people that it's good to search for them?
Yeah, I would start with the broader search, but I would go to any place that they may have a profile within reason. You're not going to search every single one necessarily, but knowing that they tend to be at Instagram. Yeah, Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat. Snapchat is a little bit different because it's not a feed, but you can have stories, right? You can be linked into other places. Snapchat is its own little world in there. But yeah, I'd say starting with the Google, but then YouTube, as people, forget who was saying about the YouTube channels that they're starting to create about themselves, Instagram, Twitter.
And also Google searching their phone number.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot that you won't get on their name, but you'll get a whole lot on that phone number.
Yeah. Facebook too, you can search through the phone number.
Mm-hmm.
And
And you can link all of these together. I know, people on their Facebook bio, which is public, they may say, find me on Instagram, find me on Snapchat, find me on YouTube, and then they're giving out their username for that as well. So impact on the future at the higher education, so sororities, fraternities, scholarships, sports. I reached out to some cousins I have that just entered the college world, and one of them said they actually have an entire committee in their sorority just dedicated to searching potential recruits on social media. And that does help determine who they let in. And then the other one has a scholarship for sports, and she said the exact same thing. Coaches searched her before they even interviewed her. And then on the job, career, profession level, what content is out there, who are your connections, and are you considering what you're putting out there, especially in related to what your life will be. So here's just another example of some news articles talking about at the college level. This coach just said, never let a 140-character tweet cost you $140,000 scholarship because of an Ohio soccer player was suspended from his team after he retweeted a picture and said, marijuana is my favorite. A Division I college program stopped recruiting a quarterback because the recruiting coordinator thought it excessive for a player to post 16 times a day on social media. Just that. And he stopped searching them, or stopped recruiting them. So then there's some do's and don'ts. Praise teammates. Don't bash opposing teams. Thank your fans. Don't swear or misspell words. So super basic. And yet they're having to remind people. And here's another one. We're not just, just a coach saying we're not like, you're here for school. You're a student athlete. So be a student athlete. I feel like some of this I'm repeating, which I think can be good in some ways, but don't necessarily need to repeat myself constantly. Any questions that you guys have? Getting them involved, talking to them, communicating, getting their input. What is their perception? They may have a totally different perception than we're even thinking. Yeah.
I'm curious about the response you get when you work with teams about all the information that you provide to us. How do they interact with all this? What is their...
I haven't presented in a large format to them. I'm actually going to be doing that in my school district in January. I haven't done that in a while, though. Working just one-on-one with them, they're pretty receptive. They don't come with a ton, to be honest, in my experience, where I've been shocked that we haven't had more. I've seen a lot of kids pretending to be other people in an effort to engage with others, and that's gotten them into trouble. We have a law enforcement officer in our building, and he's easily able to get either kids to fess up to things or to get the information. We've had sexting. We've had the fake profiles with the intent to harm, the cyberbullying. But there's definitely a lot more of the interaction with unknown people that they're clueless about. They have no idea that it's, oh yeah, but I've been gaming with them for 3 years. They're not your friend. I mean, it's that simple, but they are, no, I know them. You know, they're Joe from Nebraska. No. I know they're an 8th grader. No. You know, I mean, maybe they are. I'm not saying every single person out there is lying, but in my mind, no, they're not. And I think, to be honest, a lot of parents don't get that either. Because they'll say, oh yeah, they've been gaming with Joe since, like, you know, so that education, especially, I think one of the things that I learned real quick when I was doing this full time was because I was immersed in this world, I was sometimes having to remind myself other people are not. And so we can't assume anybody knows anything, because that generation that is raising, who are now our adolescents and young adults, did not know this. It is brand spanking new to them. Some of them have zero desire to know it. And yet we have to, for your point of your daughter, right? So we have to immerse ourselves in it. So if we're working with them, the same thing. But I would say, going back to your original question, I apologize, I feel like they've been pretty receptive. When I would present, I was shocked at, you know, talking to 300 kids, how engaged they were, because this is their world. And so they want to talk about it. So if it's a conversation versus like, why are you doing that? What are you doing there? Or if I were to say, they're not your friend, they would shut down. So like getting into the reasoning with them, but it is their world, it's what they do more than they do anything else, and so they want to engage in that conversation.
I will say that just this past week, I have students that I'm working with that are trying to get their high school diplomas. And I talked about professionalism and putting a professional face out there and cleaning up your social media. And when I talked about people losing their jobs because of things that they posted maybe 5 years ago, that now their current employer is looking back on their social media and seeing that it's not appropriate. The response I got this week was really like, well, they shouldn't be looking at my social media. They shouldn't be invading my privacy. This is my personal life. So I didn't get into the security end of it as far as you don't know who you're communicating with, but I got into the professionalism of what you're posting.
Yeah.
And across the board, it seems like they feel like I'm being overly concerned because that's their personal life and I shouldn't worry about it.
To them, it is totally different,
Yes.
right? They still think that they have this fine line of what I do here doesn't matter here, and they don't see the gray. We were talking about having, a work page where maybe you interact with the people that you work with and a personal. That does not mean they'll always be separate. We've had people that I know have posted something from school, no students' names, no students' picture, but people have found that very offensive because it crosses that boundary. And so that's something even, us at this age have to face as well. So that's where I would search them. How easy is it for that employer to go, do, and then pull it up? And they're going to go where they are, and maybe doing it with them will help to enforce that.
I've also had speakers come in, actual employers.
Yeah.
And tell the students that they've searched their, digital accounts, Facebook, Twitter, and to see what actually, they're posting. And what the one employer said, don't fool yourself, just because you didn't get fired from that job, your hours get cut, reduced down to where you're only working 1 day. So
And then maybe you'll leave.
Right. And
Yeah.
because they said, because what you represent that company,
Yeah.
when you're, regardless, is your
Yeah.
Facebook.
Yes.
But, and when the employer said that versus me saying that, the kids were like,
Yes.
whoa. And then there was one girl raised her hand, she was like, yeah, my hours got reduced.
So
And,
bell
yeah,
went off, right?
Yeah, so they connected.
Yeah, that's a good point of bringing somebody in to talk about that with them, as well as them representing, right? If I now know your name as an employer here, I can search you. And I think that's important for them to know. Anybody, once they know your name, can search you, and you are representing now, you are on 24/7, right? Once you have, whether it's the scholarship or whether it's that job.
Well, the lady that had speak to the students, she said she has the students that have the employers, they have them sign a release
Yes.
that they can go into their
Yes.
accounts.
Some places will make them give up their username. Some places will make them give up their passwords. And they may say, you don't want to? Okay, bye.
Yeah.
Next person.
Part of getting employed, they said they have them sign a
Yep.
release.
Yep.
But where's the line on that? I mean, again, legally, can people actually do that?
I don't know legally about that, to be honest. I think some employers, if you're not going to, that's okay.
Because, we're talking here about creating a safe environment, right? If the threat is, as an employer, I'm gonna come and I want to see all your history on social media and everything, we're defeating the whole purpose of the conversation.
But I think to be devil's advocate, you're representing my company.
Exactly, and that's exactly what she said.
I'm
It's
an
just-
American citizen, I represent this country. Are you gonna take my citizenship and kick me out?
Well, if they don't
Possibly.
sign the receipt, if they don't sign, then they can't, get hired.
But
So
that also
it's a
may put
matter of-
them,
The kids
yeah.
don't look that far ahead,
yeah.
and that's the reality.
Yeah.
They don't look that far ahead. They sign a release, it's like, okay, I want this job, and I don't care that they can go into my Facebook or Twitter account. They don't care about that.
I guess what I'm saying is, I want to advocate for their safety.
Oh,
but
of
also
course.
I want to
Yeah.
advocate
Yeah.
for their privacy.
Yeah, and I agree with you as well, but just playing that devil's advocate, and then to kind of go back to what you said at the beginning, do I have privacy?
But I
You know?
think that's where some people will have two accounts. You'll have a Facebook account that is your private, but you'll have a Facebook account under a different, like under a nickname, under whatever.
Yeah.
Then you'll open a Facebook.
Kind of an
account that
alias,
is your
yeah.
professional Facebook account,
And the password one might be more like, for us, if we wanted to open one that is connected to the school, we have to give up the username and password. So I don't think a lot of places ask for password, but I know it's happened. I think a lot more of them, whether you give me your username or not, I'm gonna search you. So you can either tell me it, and then we have that open dialogue, or you cannot, and I'm gonna find you, probably anyways. But I think it does go back to that reminder of what does privacy look like in this day and age? Because if we're just assuming you're not gonna find that other one, if I know who you hang out with, you know, whatever it may be, can link up to that. So here are some reminders. Maintain up-to-date and accurate profiles. So that is cleaning up what is in the past, whether it's deleting an old account and starting a new one, or just going in. Again, we can't delete forever, but we can start somewhere. We can do a little bit of that. I know I'm over time, so if you leave, I will not be offended. I will pass along stuff to Mary. So then, like I said, deleting old profiles, keeping them to a minimum. If you're not using something, get off of there. You don't have to link everything. You can easily link a lot of things together. That gives people access very easily to all the ones that are linked. So there's ways to voice your opinion in a positive way, right? Advocating rather than bashing. And then I like this statement that it said is thinking of that presence as your resume, especially for your kiddos that are in that, you know, upper teen, early adulthood, and then even us. I won't read all of this, but this is a specific quote from one of the resources I found. And then utilizing your resources. So going back to the benefits, here are some benefits. Challenge yourself, motivate yourself, get ideas, get feedback, find new opportunities. And then there's just the resource it came from. Here's some suggestions for parents. And then I have a video I would like to end with. It's one of my all-time favorites.
This is a line, and this line is mine. You will kindly find my feet and my spine are perfectly aligned. You'll also find that on either side is a plus and a minus sign. Right now I'm on this line, minus this, now I'm online. This is a line, and this line is mine. You will kindly find my feet and spine are on the plus sign. Now I'd like to assign and also define what one might find on this side of the line. I will not pretend that there are no consequences of saying something offensive online, no matter what my ignorant friend says. Because words are all I have, and yeah, I know it's sad. We hide behind the mask of the latest social networking fad. So there's respect in my status, whether through Mark Zuckerberg or Tom, and I'll treat you the same in person, and yeah, I'll accept your friend request, Mom. This is a line, and this line is mine. You will kindly find my feet and my spine are on the minus sign. Now I'd like to assign and also define what one might find on this side of the line. Now I might seem unassuming, but if you only knew what I was doing, brewing, spewing, spitting venom when I'm at that screen, I ruin. Reputations I will splatter. Typing faster, I get madder. All the insults I will gather. You're so lucky, it's only sadder. Day. You have one day. Oh yes, Sunday, for my words to die away. And on that one day, oh, I must say, you're going to wish you had a different name. But then it's Monday, and at school, I'll remind them all of what I said. Then it's Tuesday, and then it's Wednesday, and then we'll all find out you're dead. This is a line, and this line is mine. And now that I've assigned what one might find on either side, you will kindly find that my feet and my spine are on the plus sign. And I'm not moving. Where are you?
So I know that kind of tied back into being in the school. I just like his point of saying we can define and we know what's on either side, and we ultimately have to decide for ourselves, which can be difficult, where we want to be. It's very easy to be pulled and pushed and conform into something that we're not, but ultimately we have to be responsible for our choices and actions. So here are resources that I would just suggest if you're looking for whether it's Pew, like I said earlier, has a lot of good stats. So does cyberbullying.org. They do dive into the realm of the sexting, revenge porn, sextortion. Common Sense Media is really good for school age. I've actually found a ton of stuff just through watching the different TED Talks, whether through TED or YouTube. And then the Attorney General's office has a lot of stuff for the school age as well. Any questions, thoughts? My contact information's there. And then I just tried to put anything that I used on here for your guys' access. Thoughts, questions, anything that you would like to share? Thank you guys so much. I do really appreciate your time.